beautiful soul. I'm so glad you're here. Today's experience is a little different from the videos I normally create. This isn't a color analysis. This isn't about finding your season. And this isn't about choosing the colors that are supposedly most flattering on you. Today is about something much deeper. It's about the colors that call to us, the colors that seem to appear again and again, the colors we can't stop looking at. The colors we wear when nobody is telling us what we should wear. The colors that somehow feel like home. After more than 40 years working with color and fabric, art, and creativity, I've become fascinated by something. The colors we're drawn to often arrive before we understand why. A woman suddenly becomes obsessed with blue. Another starts filling her home with warm golds. Someone who has worn black for years suddenly finds herself reaching for rose. And often, these shifts happen long before any visible change appears in her life. The colors, they arrive first, then the transformation. The color arrives first, then the awareness. The color arrives first, then the courage. I've seen it happen too many times to dismiss it as coincidence. I believe color speaks a language that many of us have forgotten how to hear. And sometimes the colors we are drawn to are reflecting something our soul already knows, something we need, something we're learning, something we are becoming. Now, before we begin, I want to say something important. This isn't fortune telling. I'm not going to tell you exactly what's about to happen. Instead, think of this as a conversation, an invitation, a mirror, a moment to pause and listen to yourself. Because so many women spend their lives listening to everyone else, listening to what they should do, how they should dress. Gosh, that's something, right? Who they should be, what they should want. And after a while, it becomes difficult to hear our own voices, difficult to recognize our own desires, difficult to remember who we are beneath all the roles we've been carrying. This experience is an opportunity to reconnect with that voice, the one that's still inside you, the one that knows. So here's what I'd like you to do. Take a slow breath. Let your shoulders soften. Notice your body relaxing into this moment. There's nowhere else you need to be right now. Nothing you need to solve. Nothing you need to fix. Just be here. Now, look at the colors in front of you. Don't analyze them. Don't try to choose the right one. There isn't one. Simply notice which color is calling to you. Maybe it's the one that immediately catches your eye. Maybe it's the one that feels comforting. Maybe it's the one that surprises you. Trust whatever happens. Your intuition is often much wiser than your thinking mind. And if you're drawn to more than one color, that's perfectly okay. Many women find themselves between seasons. One color may reflect where they've been, and another one might reflect where they're going. Allow yourself to listen to both if that's what feels right. Today, you have four colors to choose from: soft rose, ocean blue, golden ochre, and deep plum. Each carries a different message. Each reflects a different season. Each holds a different invitation. So, take another breath. Look at the colors one more time. Notice which one keeps pulling your attention. Once you've chosen, use the timestamps below to move directly to your color. And before you go, I'd love to know something. As you're choosing, ask yourself this question: what am I longing for right now? Don't force the answer. Just let the question settle. You may be surprised by what emerges. All right, beautiful soul. Choose your color and let's begin. If you chose soft rose, I want you to settle in. Take a breath. Maybe place your hand over your heart for just a moment, because there's something incredibly tender about this color. And before we go any further, I want to tell you what I feel first. I don't feel weakness. I don't feel fragility. I don't feel someone who can't handle life. I actually feel the opposite. I feel someone who has been strong for a very long time. Someone who has learned how to carry things. Someone who has learned how to show up. Someone who has learned how to keep going even when she was tired. Someone who has learned how to take care of other people. And perhaps someone who has become so skilled at carrying everything else that she's forgotten what it feels like to be carried herself. If that resonates, I want you to know you're not alone. I think many women arrive at this season of life and suddenly realize they've spent decades becoming everything everyone else needed: a mother, a partner, a caretaker, a professional, a helper, a fixer, a problem solver, a provider. And somewhere along the way, without even realizing it, they slowly move themselves further and further down their own list. Not because they didn't matter, not because they didn't have dreams, not because they didn't have desires, but because life was busy. There was always something more urgent, something more important, something that needed attention. And perhaps you've been living in that place for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to ask yourself a simple question: what do I want? Okay, not what should I do? Not what does everyone else need? Not what's practical? Not what's expected? What do I want? Sometimes women sit with that question and realize they don't know anymore. And if that's you, I think Rose may have found you for a reason. Because Rose often appears when the soul is trying to reconnect us with ourselves. Not with a new version of ourselves, the original version. The version that existed before all the responsibilities. The version that loved beauty. The version that loved curiosity. The version that created simply because it brought joy. The version that wasn't measuring her worth by productivity. I want you to think back for a moment. Think back to when you were younger. What did you love? What made you lose track of time? What made you feel alive? What delighted you? What fascinated you? What are you naturally drawn towards? Because I think some of those clues are important. And I don't think they're gone. I think they've simply been waiting, waiting patiently beneath everything else. I also feel something else around this color, a longing, not necessarily sadness, and not necessarily grief, just quiet longing, a feeling that there must be something more, not more achievement, not more accomplishment, not more doing, but more aliveness, more beauty, more connection, more meaning, more room to breathe. And perhaps you've been feeling that lately. Maybe it shows up when you're sitting quietly. Maybe it appears when you're looking at artwork. Maybe it's there when you walk through a garden. Maybe it's there when you see a beautiful piece of clothing and feel something stir inside you. A little voice that says, I miss that. I miss feeling like that. I miss that version of myself. If you've been feeling that, I want you to hear this. That longing isn't a problem, it's an invitation. Your soul doesn't create longing to torture you, it creates longing to guide you. Longing is often a compass, it points towards something we need, something we value, something we've neglected. And Rose feels very much like a compass, pointing you back to yourself. Now, I want to talk about beauty for a moment, because many women dismiss beauty as something superficial, something extra, something optional. But I don't believe that. Not for creative women, not for sensitive women, not for women whose souls are nourished through color, texture, art, nature, and expression. Beauty is not a luxury. Beauty is nourishment. Think about how different you feel walking into a beautiful room. Think about how a flower can change your mood. Think about how certain colors make you feel more alive. Think about how music can move you. Beauty feeds something inside us. And I think many women who choose Rose have been underfed in that way. Not physically, but spiritually, emotionally, creatively. Life became practical, functional, efficient. And perhaps now your soul is saying, I need more beauty. I need more color. I need more wonder. I need more delight. I need more things that make me feel alive. Now let's talk about creativity. Because I have a feeling this color is speaking to many women who have disconnected from their creativity. And when I say creativity, I don't mean becoming an artist. I mean allowing yourself to create, to express, to play, to explore, to follow an idea, to make something simply because it wants to be made. Maybe you used to paint. Maybe you used to sew. Maybe you used to decorate. Maybe you used to write. Maybe you used to garden. Maybe you used to make beautiful things. Or maybe you simply used to see the world differently. And life happened, responsibilities happened, and creativity slowly moved to the side. Not because it wasn't important, but because everything else seemed more important. But here's what I've learned: creativity doesn't disappear, it waits. It waits quietly, patiently. And when the time is right, it starts knocking again, sometimes through color, sometimes through longing, sometimes through restlessness, sometimes through inspiration. And I think that may be what's happening here. I think something inside you wants expression, not perfection, expression. There's a difference. Perfection asks, can I do this well? Expression asks, what wants to come through me? Rose is interested in expression. Now let's talk about what may be changing, because I don't think this is simply a healing season. I think it's also an emergent season. I feel a woman stepping out of survival, not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually. Learning to trust herself again, learning to choose herself again, learning to listen to herself again, learning that her desires matter, learning that her needs matter, learning that joy matters. And that can feel uncomfortable at first because many women have been taught to earn everything. They have to earn rest, earn pleasure, earn beauty, earn happiness. But Rose doesn't work that way. Rose asks, what if you didn't have to earn it? What if beauty belonged in your life right now? What if creativity belonged in your life right now? What if joy belonged in your life right now? What if you were allowed to want what you want? Take a breath with that. Because for some women, that's the hardest question in this entire reading. Now, before we finish, I'm going to leave you with a few reflections. And this is good for journaling. What part of yourself have you been neglecting? What beauty are you craving? What creative impulse keeps you returning? What would bring you alive right now? What would happen if you stopped waiting for permission? And finally, what if this next chapter isn't about becoming someone new? What if it's about remembering who you've always been? This week, I want to invite you into a rose ritual. Wear a color that makes you feel beautiful. Buy yourself flowers. Spend time in nature. Visit an art gallery. Work with fabric. Create something with your hands. Make space for beauty, even if it's only 10 minutes, especially if it's only 10 minutes. Because I think the message of Rose is beautifully simple. You have spent enough time surviving. Your soul is ready to start blooming again. And perhaps the woman you're looking for isn't somewhere ahead of you. Perhaps she's been waiting for you all along. Thank you for spending this time with me, my beautiful rose soul. When you're ready, we'll continue with the next color. If you chose ocean blue, I want you to take a slow breath, because this color feels very different from rose. When I sit with blue, I don't immediately feel longing. I feel quiet, a deep sense of quiet, the kind of quiet that often arrives after a period of noise. And when I say noise, I don't necessarily mean sound. I mean opinions, expectations, advice, responsibilities. The constant stream of information that fills our lives. The endless messages telling us who we should be, what we should do, what we should want, how we should live. And what I feel for many of you who chose blue is that you've been carrying a lot of that lately. Not because you've done anything wrong, because you're thoughtful, because you care, because you want to make good decisions, because you're trying to figure things out. But somewhere along the way, all that outside input may have made it harder to hear your own voice. And I think that's why blue is here. Blue often appears when your soul needs space. Not more answers, space. Not more information, space. Not another course, Not another book, not another expert, just enough quiet to hear yourself again. I wonder if you've noticed that recently. Maybe you've been asking everyone what they think. Maybe you've been researching. I'm smiling because I can relate to this. Maybe you've been looking for certainty. Maybe you've been trying to find the perfect answer before taking the next step. And yet, no matter how much information you gather, something still feels unresolved. That's because I don't think the answer you're looking for is outside of you. I think it's inside you. And blue knows that because blue is the color of listening, listening to your intuition, listening to your inner knowing, listening to the wisdom that already lives inside you. Now, I want to tell you something I've noticed. Many women who choose blue are in transition, not necessarily a dramatic one. Sometimes it's subtle, a feeling that the life you've built no longer quite fits the way it should or the same way it was. A feeling that something is shifting beneath the surface. A feeling that old goals don't excite you the way they once did. A feeling that you're questioning things you've never questioned before. And because you're in between chapters, it's tempting to search for answers everywhere. But blue keeps whispering, and I keep trying to listen to this one. Slow down. Listen. Trust yourself. I keep seeing someone standing at a shoreline. The tide is moving in and out. And instead of rushing into the water, she's simply watching, listening, observing, waiting for clarity. That image feels important because I think many of you are trying to force certainty. And blue isn't interested in forcing. Blue trusts timing. Blue trusts the tide. Blue trusts the clarity arrives when you stop chasing it. And let's talk about intuition, because I think that's a big part of this message. Most women think intuition is something mystical, something rare, something only certain people have. But I don't believe that. I think intuition is simply the quiet voice beneath all the noise. And the challenge is that modern life doesn't leave much room for quiet. We're constantly consuming, scrolling, watching, listening, learning, comparing, reacting. And eventually our own voice becomes harder to hear. Blue asks us to reverse that, to become a listener again, to become an observer again, to notice what we already know. Because here's what I keep sensing from many of you. You already know more than you think you do. You already know what feels aligned. You already know what feels wrong. You already know what your heart is trying to tell you. You've just been doubting it. And perhaps you've been waiting for permission. Permission from a teacher. Permission from a coach. Permission from a partner. Permission from the world. What if you just trusted yourself? What if your knowing was enough? Now I want to talk about creativity, because blue is creative too. But it's a different kind of creativity than ochre, which we'll talk about later. Blue creativity isn't loud. It isn't performative. It isn't about being seen. It's reflective. It's thoughtful. It's meaningful. Blue is the woman who journals, the woman who walks on the beach and thinks, the woman who sits by a window with a cup of tea, the woman who creates because she needs to understand herself. And I wonder if you've been craving more of that lately. Not more productivity, more reflection, not more hustle, more meaning, not more achievement, more connection. Blue is reminding you that your inner world matters, that your thoughts matter, that your feelings matter, that your dreams matter. And perhaps you've been neglecting that inner world for a while. Now let's talk about what may be ending. Because every color carries both an ending and a beginning. And for blue, I think the ending is external validation, or at least the need for so much of it. I think you're being invited to trust yourself more deeply, to stop asking everyone else what they think before asking yourself, to stop assuming someone else knows better, to stop giving away your authority. And that doesn't mean becoming stubborn, it means becoming grounded. There's a difference. Grounded women can listen to advice without abandoning themselves. Grounded women can learn from others without losing their own voice. Grounded women can receive guidance without handing over their power. And I think that's where blue is leading you, towards trust, towards self-respect, towards inner knowing, towards peace. Now let's talk about what wants to emerge. I feel a stronger version of you, not louder, clearer. A version of you who knows what matters. A version of you who is less distracted by what everyone else is doing. A version of you who trusts her instincts. A version of you who doesn't need constant reassurance. A version of you who can sit quietly with herself and know she's enough. That feels like the invitation of blue. Not certainty, trust. Not answers, wisdom. Not noise, clarity. So before we finish, I want to leave you with a few questions, again for journaling. What do I already know but keep doubting? What would happen if I trusted myself more? What noise needs to be turned down? What truth is trying to emerge? And finally, if I stopped asking everyone else what to do, what would my own heart say? For your blue practice this week, I want you to create a pocket of quiet. 10 minutes is enough, but leave your phone behind. Sit by the water if you can, and watch the sky. Journal. Take a walk. Listen, not to a podcast, not to music. Listen to yourself. Because I think there is wisdom waiting for you there. The message of blue is simple. You are not lost. You are simply being called inward. And the voice you've been searching for may be your own. Thank you for spending this time with me, my beautiful blue soul. If you chose golden ochre, I want you to notice what happened when you looked at the colors. Did this one immediately catch your eye? Did it feel warm, alive, hopeful? Maybe even a little exciting? Because that is exactly how this color feels to me. When I look at golden ochre, I don't see a woman who is lost. I see a woman who has been waiting for the right moment, waiting for more time, waiting for more confidence, waiting until she feels ready. And if I'm honest, I think some of you have been waiting much longer than you realize. And it's not because you're lazy, not because you don't care, not because you're incapable, but because somewhere along the way you started believing that before you could begin, you needed certainty. You needed a plan. You needed permission. You needed proof. You needed guarantees. And creativity does not work that way. Creativity has never worked that way. Creativity is a wild thing, a curious thing, a beautiful thing, and it rarely arrives with instructions. It usually arrives with an invitation. And I think golden ochre is an invitation. An invitation to stop standing at the edge of your life and step into it. Because when I sit with this color, I feel movement, energy, momentum, possibility. I feel a part of you that is ready, maybe more ready than you're allowed yourself to admit. And yet, I also feel hesitation, a tug of war. One part of you saying, let's do it. And the other part saying, what if I fail? What if nobody likes it? What if I'm too old? What if it's not good enough? What if it's a waste of time? If those thoughts sound familiar, I want you to know something. Almost every creative woman I have ever met has wrestled with those same questions, including me, because creativity asks us to risk something. Not money, not status, ourselves. It asks us to be seen. It asks us to care. It asks us to try. And that can feel really vulnerable. But here's what I keep hearing for you. The greater risk isn't failure. The greater risk is never beginning. The greater risk is carrying your ideas around for years and never giving them life. The greater risk is reaching the end of the chapter and wondering what might have happened if you had trusted yourself. Golden ochre feels like a color that arrives when something inside you wants expression. A dream, an idea, a project, a business, an artwork, a new direction, a new way of living. Something wants out. And perhaps you've been trying to ignore it. Perhaps you've been talking yourself out of it. Perhaps you've been telling yourself you'll start someday. But I think your soul might be growing impatient. Not in an angry way, in the way spring becomes impatient beneath winter soil. The seeds know it's time. The roots know it's time. Everything is preparing for growth. And that's exactly what this color feels like. Growth, expansion, emergence. Now let's talk about something important. I think many women who choose golden ochre have spent years being responsible. And responsibility is a beautiful thing. But sometimes responsibility becomes a cage. We become so focused on what we should do that we lose touch with what we want to do. And when that happens, life can start feeling flat, predictable, colorless. You still function, you still accomplish things. But let's face it, the spark is missing. The excitement is missing. The sense of possibility is missing. Golden ochre arrives like a match being struck in a dark room. A small flame, not overwhelming, not dramatic, but enough to illuminate what has been hidden. I wonder what has been hidden inside you. What dream have you quietly carried? What idea keeps returning? What project refuses to leave you alone? Because the things that persist often matter. The ideas that keep coming back usually aren't random. They're invitations. And I have a feeling you've received the same invitation more than once. Maybe through a book, a conversation, a piece of art, a longing, a confidence, a feeling. The universe has a way of repeating itself when we're not listening. Now I want to talk about creativity because I think some of you have a complicated relationship with it. Maybe you're convinced yourself you're not creative. Maybe someone told you that years ago. Maybe you compare yourself to other people. Maybe you've decided creativity just belongs to artists. But I don't believe that. I think creativity belongs to anyone willing to imagine something that doesn't exist yet. Creativity is how we decorate a home, it's how we style an outfit, it's how we solve problems, how we reinvent ourselves, how we build businesses, how we shape our lives. Creativity is life force. And golden ochre feels like life force returning. The image I keep seeing is a woman standing in front of a door. The door isn't locked. It never was. She's simply been standing there wondering if she's allowed to open it. And perhaps that's what this season is about. Not waiting for permission, giving it to yourself. Not waiting to be chosen, choosing yourself. Not waiting to feel fearless, moving forward while feeling afraid. Because courage isn't the absence of fear, courage is movement despite fear. And I think you're more courageous than you realize. I also feel a strong message about visibility. Some of you are hiding, not physically, creatively, emotionally, spiritually. You've been shrinking your ideas, shrinking your dreams, shrinking your voice. Perhaps because visibility feels uncomfortable. Perhaps because you've been hurt before. Perhaps because you've learned it's safer not to stand out. But golden ochre doesn't want you to hide. It wants you to shine, not for attention, for expression. There is a difference. Flowers don't bloom because they want applause. They bloom because that's their nature. Perhaps your creativity is the same. Before we finish, I want to leave you with a few questions. What idea keeps returning? What dream have I postponed? What would I create if I stopped worrying about the outcome? What part of me wants to be seen? What am I ready to begin? And finally, what if the life I'm longing for begins with one small act of courage? This week, I want to invite you into ochre practice. Choose one thing, just one idea, one project, one creative impulse, and spend 10 minutes with it. Not tomorrow, not next month, this week. 10 minutes. That's all. Because action creates clarity. Action creates confidence. Action creates momentum. The message of golden ochre is beautifully simple. You do not need permission. You do not need perfection. You do not need certainty. You simply need to begin. The spark you've been waiting for isn't from somewhere outside of you. It's already there. Golden, warm, alive, waiting for oxygen, waiting for trust, waiting for you. Thank you for spending this time with me, my beautiful ochre soul. And remember, the life you're imagining may be much closer than you think. It may begin with the next brave step. If you chose deep plum, I want you to take a slow breath because this color feels different. The other colors feel like invitations. This one feels like a threshold. When I look at deep plum, I see a woman standing between two chapters, not fully in the old one and not fully in the new one, somewhere in between. And if you've been feeling unsettled lately, I want you to know that may not be a sign that something is wrong. It may be a sign that something is changing. Deep plum is the color of transformation, not the kind that happens overnight, not the dramatic movie version where everything suddenly makes sense. The real kind, the kind that happens quietly, the kind that asks for patience, the kind that unfolds one layer at a time. And I have a feeling many of you are in exactly that place. You may have outgrown something, a role, a relationship, a way of thinking, a version of yourself, a dream that once fit but no longer does. And the strange thing about outgrowing something is that it can feel both exciting and heartbreaking at the same time. Because even when we're ready for change, there is often grief. Grief for who we were, grief for what we expected, grief for what could have been, grief for the familiar. And I think some of you have been carrying that grief without realizing it. You know something is shifting. You can feel it, but you can't quite name it. It's like standing on a shoreline watching the tide change. The water is moving. Something is happening, but the destination isn't visible yet. And that's where trust comes in. Because deep plum is not a color of certainty. It's a color of becoming. It's a color that asks, can you trust yourself even when you don't have all the answers? Can you trust the process even when the path isn't clear? Can you trust the unfolding? I think many women who choose this color are discovering that the life they built no longer fits the woman they've become. Not because they failed, but because they've evolved. The things that once excited you may not excite you anymore. The things that once mattered may not matter the same way. The goals that once drove you may no longer feel meaningful. And sometimes that realization can be frightening. Because if the old things don't fit anymore, what comes next? Deep Plum says, you don't have to know yet. You only have to stay open. There is a story I see often with women in midlife. For years, they're focused on building careers, building families, building businesses, building lives. And then one day, they wake up and realize they're being asked a different question. Not, what am I building? But, who am I becoming? And that question changes everything. Because becoming isn't about achievement, it's about alignment, it's about truth, it's about living in a way that feels authentic. And I think authenticity is a huge part of this color. I wonder how many masks you've been carrying, not intentionally, just the masks we learn to wear. You know, the capable one, the strong one, the responsible one, and of course, the agreeable one. The helper, the caretaker, the achiever, the peacemaker. And perhaps you've worn some of these masks for so long that they're started to feel like your identity. But Deep Plum has a way of dissolving masks, not through force, through honesty. It asks, who are you when nobody needs anything from you? Who are you when you're not performing a role? Who are you when you're simply yourself? Those are all really powerful questions, and I think they're important right now. I also feel something around visibility, not the visibility of attention, the visibility of authenticity, the willingness to stop hiding parts of yourself, the willingness to let people see who you truly are, the willingness to express your gifts. your ideas, your creativity, your wisdom, your perspective. And I know that can feel vulnerable, but I also know something else. The things we hide often become the things we long for. The voice we silence becomes the voice we miss. The creativity we suppress becomes the creativity we crave. The truth we avoid becomes the truth that keeps knocking at the door. And I think your truth is knocking. I think a deeper version of you is knocking, not demanding, not forcing, simply waiting, waiting for you to open the door. There is also a powerful message here around trust, because I think some of you are waiting until you can see the entire staircase before taking the first step. But life rarely works that way. Most meaningful journeys begin with one visible step, and then another, and then another. The next chapter of your life may not arrive all at once. It may arrive through small decisions, small acts of courage, small moments of honesty, small choices that slowly lead you toward yourself. I want you to imagine for a moment that 1 year from now, you're sitting in a room that feels completely aligned with who you've become. How does that woman feel? What is she wearing? What does she spend her time doing? What has she stopped apologizing for? What has she finally allowed herself to embrace? Because I think that woman already exists. She isn't waiting for you in the future. She is emerging now. And perhaps this season is about creating space for her. Before we finish, I want to leave you with a few questions to journal. What part of my life no longer fits? What truth am I ready to acknowledge? What identity am I outgrowing? What part of me wants to emerge? What would I do if I trusted the process? And finally, this is a big one. Who am I becoming? This week, I want to invite you into a plum practice. Choose one thing that feels like your future self. One color, one outfit, one project, one conversation, one creative act, one decision, and do it. Not because you're certain, because you're becoming. Because every small action teaches your nervous system that it's safe to move forward. It's safe to grow. It's safe to evolve. It is safe to become. The message of Deep Plum is this: you are not lost. You are not behind. You are not starting over. You are unfolding. And what is unfolding is beautiful. Thank you for spending this time with me, my beautiful plum soul. Trust what is emerging. Trust what is leaving. Trust what is becoming. Most of all, trust yourself. And there you have it. 4 colors, 4 messages, 4 invitations. If you listen to your color, I'd love to know in the comments which one you chose. Were you soft rose, ocean blue, golden ochre, or deep plum? And more importantly, what part of your message resonated most? What did you need to hear today? I read every comment and I love hearing what speaks to you. Now, if today's experience felt meaningful, I want to invite you to take the next step, because these colors are just the beginning. Over the years, I've discovered that we all have deeper color patterns that influence not only what we're drawn to, but how we express ourselves, create, and move through the world. That's why I created my free soul color quiz. The quiz helps you to begin uncovering the emotional energy behind the colors you're naturally drawn to and the creative gifts they may be trying to awaken. You can find the link below this video. It's completely free, and it may help you understand why certain colors keep showing up in your life. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I create videos about color, creativity, self-expression, art, and the beautiful process of becoming more yourself. Until next time, remember this: color is more than something we wear. It's something we live. And sometimes the colors calling us are really our souls trying to lead us home. I'll see you in the next video.